The thing about this particular turf talking point is that it's painfully obvious that you don't actually care about women in prison. Because if you actually listen to women who have been in prison, you would know that it's nowhere near one of their main concerns. Even when talking specifically about SA, the most likely perpetrators of this against women in prison are the guards taking care of them. But that you don't care about. Captive trans women, even when in prison alongside cis women, are much more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators of it. And the risk for trans women when in prison alongside men increases exponentially. But that's the thing that you actually want. Because this is not about protecting cis women, this is about enacting violence against trans women. Because you only care about protecting women when it gives you the right to hurt other women.
Scotland has a new transgender rape policy and it is absolutely insane. Let's get into it.
No, let's get into how conservatives and TERFs are fucking deranged. This law doesn't just affect people who commit crimes, and let it be known, this doesn't just apply to sex crimes. It also helps trans women who just commit normal crimes like shoplifting or something go to women's prisons. Because why should they be put in with men? Because look at me, right? You can say like, Freya, you don't exactly look like a woman. And to that I would be like, okay, that's your point. But I don't exactly fit in with men. I wouldn't do well. Like, I would get turned into a human fleshlight. Okay,
I'm just gonna say, no, you wouldn't. No, they're not checking for you.
No, what's not clicking here? And does it not click that women who assault women, like cis women who assault women, also go to women's prisons? Or cis men who assault men also go to men's prisons? Could it be that we imprison everyone in like the same system? As well as that, it helps us document the amount of trans women who are also assaulted. Because before they would just be reported as male. And I don't know about you, but a crime against me isn't exactly going to play out the same as a crime against the cis man.
Mama, I know I'm a demon, it ain't nothing she could do but pray for me.
A transsexual inmate in the UK is going to be transferred from a male's prison to a female's prison. Mm-hmm. And the reason why they've decided to do that is so she can complete her sex change operation. Mm-hmm. She's planning on having her penis removed. And this story was fine. I had no problem with the story. I thought it was great.
I swear to God, y'all, I honestly don't know. What makes you a transgender? Can I claim that I want to be a man now without getting a surgery and say that I identify as a man and that makes me a transgender? Please help me understand. I'm not being funny. I swear to God.
More than a dozen people arrested, all transported to TGK, when these three say things during the booking process got worse.
They had no idea where to place me and stuff, and then...
Were they nice about it?
Absolutely not. Okay. And when they found out my name, when they said my legal name, I had to raise my hand, obviously, because it was me. And then that's when things started to get like, that's not a woman, that's a man. And that's when things started to get very transphobic.
She lost her freedom, and not just because she was behind bars. I'm Ryan Bass here with you on 10 Tampa Bay. Glad to have you here with us. Carla Bello, that's who you just heard from there. She's a transgender woman, and she says her rights were violated during her 11-day stay in Pinellas County Jail. Our Liz Crawford talked to her about what she calls one of the most traumatic experiences of her life.
The only thing I had going in there was my faith and my identity, and they stripped me of my identity.
It's difficult being a woman in a men's prison.
Being referred as he can be sometimes degrading.
Sometimes you have low self-esteem because they look at you if you wear makeup and they want to talk crazy behind your back or to your face, and you can't do nothing about it.
Briella Amaya Cruz is a transgender woman, but her gender and legal name, also known as her dead name, are male.
And then they blatantly just told me, you have a d***. So you're a man, and we're going to treat you like a man in here.
Cruz says guards forced her to remove her hair and ping-ponged her between the male and female population.
It's a difficult life. Believe me, and living in a man's prison, it's very difficult. Up until 4 years ago, in Department of Corrections, CDCR, we had no gender affirming clothes or cosmetics or anything like that. And because two trans women, they through the Department of Corrections, we were really able to actually identify as who we are. And I think that that's only right.
I've been incarcerated for 30 years now, and I prefer to be in a woman's prison because I look at myself as a transgender woman, and I should be treated as a woman.
Erased, dehumanized, embarrassed. They were saying all these things in front of everyone, and like it wasn't like they weren't taking me serious. They were making me seem like if I was just playing dress up and that I was in a costume, and this is just like...
Because even though you're in a man's prison, doesn't mean I'm going to act like a man, and I'm not going to change who I am in order to fit in. So I'm still going to be female in a man's prison.
What I want to understand is, what does it mean to act like a man? Because any way that a male acts is acting like a man. It's a man acting that way. You're a male, so you're acting like a man, which just shows that men can act like you, which means there's a range of behaviors that males can engage in and a range of personalities that males can have. You're one of them. I am so confused that what acting like a man even means. Because you definitely don't act like a woman, that's for sure.
Because it's so critically important that our LGBTQI plus community is represented, right, acknowledged, right, and also affirmed.
And a lot of people were really furious when this took place, when we were getting the clothing. I mean, people were like, well, why do you guys get this? And I'm like, well, if you guys stuck together, you probably have more things too. Stop bitching about things, about what we have.
Right? For their humanity and their dignity and their ability to be treated equitably in society. But your experience is unique, Jai, right? The first person, right, and the first trans person in New York State to be transferred from a men's facility to a women's facility. Talk to our viewers about what was that experience like?
I actually was a part of history in Dublin FCI. This is the first time in the history of prison that they actually allow a male to come to a female prison to stay. When I tell you this was a huge event. They shut down the whole yard. The whole prison got shut down. It was talked about for weeks, preparing for him to come. The story that I got on it was he did a lot of time in federal prison. Oh. And they brought him to the prison with the women. Walked around, he was a man, a whole man, but he seen himself as a woman.
Carla Bello says she's known she was meant to be a female pretty much her whole life. After decades of soul searching, she started to transition in her early 30s. She's never been happier.
This feels natural and this feels normal to me.
But in 2019, she says she hit a major setback when she was arrested and taken to the Pinellas County Jail.
Inside the Dallas County Jail,
I felt helpless, I felt powerless, I felt violated.
Valerie Jackson felt discrimination. She was arrested 2 years ago at the airport for having a handgun in her purse.
Forgot to remove it and was taken to Lou Sterrett.
At first, Valerie was sitting with female inmates, but during the medical exam, she says the nurse found out.
So I get to the county jail and I get undressed, and they was like, when I take off my shirt, it's like, okay, is this individual a man or is a female? So one of the things that they wanted to ask the question, I could see it in their face because I had breasts at that point. So I told them, I said, I was born male, but at night I identify as female. So it was like, okay, we got you in the right spot.
I told them I was transgender.
And she remembers clearly the humiliation.
I was then questioned by corrections officers if I had had a sex change, if I had everything done down there, and then was told that they had to verify by me pulling my pants down.
Valerie followed the order and was placed with male inmates for 13 hours.
The fact that they verified and then put him with male inmates means that he lied, which is why they wouldn't have to verify if he was honest and was like, no, I have a penis. And then the fact that he got placed with male inmates means he had a penis. So he lied. And he has a penis. That's where you belong, sir. Sorry.
For many of these trans incarcerated people, they'd rather be housed with the gender they identify with. Something prisons are required by the Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act to consider on a case-by-case basis.
Cruz's friend, also a transgender woman, had a different experience. Unlike Cruz, Jay Bucci is legally a woman. Her name and gender changed by the courts. But according to Bucci, jail guards dismissed it.
They pretended like it didn't matter, like my license was fake, and that they held power over state and federal law.
Now she has a lawyer and a lawsuit against the county.
The state of Texas recognizes her as a female, inexcusable beyond any question.
Attorney Scott Palmer says policy was broken.
Either they don't know the policy or they intentionally disregarded the policy. Either one is a violation of her constitutional rights.
A police report shows Bello was picked up on a warrant for failing to appear in traffic court.
They stripped me of everything. They took everything from me.
Bello says she was housed with male inmates and treated like a man for 11 days.
Bucci says after guards learned she was a transgender woman, she was forced to strip for a search and then taken from the female ward to the male ward. BC6 reached out to TGK. A spokesperson said Miami-Dade Corrections and Rehabilitation has procedures in place for the intake of transgender inmates and that it is, quote, committed to safety and security and conducts requisite searches of inmates. As such, items such as head coverings, wigs, jewelry, piercings, etc., where contraband can be hidden and or considered to be contraband are removed.
Of course, thank you. So the experience of spending so much time incarcerated in a male-dominated facilities, is greatly different than having been transferred to a women's facility. In all honesty, unbeknownst to me at the time, it was the greatest decision that I could have made to me. I had turned down the opportunity quite a few times, especially when I was younger in the system, for multiple reasons. A couple of them being, how would I survive? How would I be looked at, right? Would I be able to fit in? But most importantly, the first thing I said is, how am I going to survive?
Okay, so what I know about prison is that there is very much an informal economy, meaning there's a way that inmates sort of get things for each other. There's a lot of barter and trade, especially if you don't have somebody on the outside who can send you money and who can provide financial support, or if you don't want to work or don't get a job or have a infraction that precludes you from getting a job. So when they mean, how am I going to survive? What he's saying is he basically depended on a barter system, and you can imagine what he was bartering for to get things that he needs.
But
did he shower with the regular women and everything?
He did everything with the women. First time ever. I think in the history of America that this has happened.
Being a transgender woman at this facility, it's a lot harder because there's no privacy. Zero privacy in the showers. The housing unit itself is wide open.
I really had to remove myself from the need to rely on others, and had to really focus on what it is that I wanted to achieve. And I absolutely did want to make it possible or contribute to the possibility of having trans women having trans women go to female facilities.
The bunk spaces, you know, getting dressed, putting lotion on, just stuff like that is very, it's hard.
I think that what I did was amazing in the end, but I also think that it opened up so many doors, and I'm so super happy that I decided to do that.
Except then I read about the inmate's past and why she's in prison in the first place.
Sources tell Pix 11 News 83-year-old Harvey Marcelin, a transgender woman, was the person seen on the video. So police obtained a warrant for her apartment. Court documents show they found a woman's head and electrical saws inside Marcelin's apartment.
I was robbing women for their accessories, their purses, their makeup, because I was too afraid to go into the stores and buy my own things.
Okay, precious, time for a little treat.
A violent offender convicted of sexually assaulting a 10-year-old girl will serve out their sentence in a Los Angeles County youth facility.
This despite now being 26 years old.
Was housed with a male inmate, which was abusing women while he was on the outside, and he was biological a male, and he had some violent and abusive towards females.
Precious. Come on, girl. Come on, Precious. Come on.
She was housed there with him by CWF sergeants for knowing that he was a violent man. It was a joke that they put my sister in there with him to see how long she would last.
I got a yummy, yummy snack for you. Come on, come and get it.
Even though they all knew she was a CHP officer and that she was a survivor of domestic violence.
Precious! Are you up there, you little shit? Come and get it, pretty girl.
Eyewitness News reporter Leo Stallworth has more on the controversial case.
26-year-old Hannah Tubbs, who identifies as a transgender female, has a lengthy criminal record, including violent crimes in multiple states. A DNA match in 2019 linking Tubbs to a sexual assault in a Denny's restaurant in Palmdale in 2014.
Please come on. Come on.
Tubbs admitting to raping a child in the restaurant's bathroom.
I am not interested in debating whether or not a specific trans person is dangerous to cis women.
Who do you fuck with? Come on, take that bone. Come on.
Which is the argument that Blair relies on to say that trans people should be placed in prisons according to their assigned sex at birth.
Come on.
This is engaging in a type of respectability politics where members of an oppressed community are asked to denounce other members who perpetrate harm.
She strangled her lover, okay, to death. And was charged with manslaughter and was sentenced to 5 years.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
European justice, I don't get it.
She's being transferred to a female prison.
Right. Now, she attempted to rape a woman when she was still he.
Right.
Okay.
But she still technically is a he. I mean,
On January 1st, 2014, Tubbs committed the crime of sexual penetration by use of force of a victim under 14 years old. The victim in this case was a 10-year-old girl. Tubbs was just shy of 18 at the time of the violent crime and remained free of charges until the DNA match. The case was prosecuted in juvenile court and not transferred to adult court due to LA County District Attorney George Gascon's policy not to prosecute juveniles as adults.
I prefer to be housed with my identity, but being here with the other guys You have to fit into where you can fit in, otherwise they're going to cast you out.
Tonight, a special report on what's taking place inside California's female prisons. In September 2020, Governor Gavin Newsom signed Senate Bill 132 into law, requiring prisons to house inmates based on their chosen gender identity.
Look, here's what I'm split on. One, should we go out of our way to accommodate her?
Valerie isn't keeping quiet. She is fighting to protect the transgender community.
Transitioning's not easy. I mean, this situation definitely makes it difficult, just adds to the list of difficulties that trans people have to deal with.
Open area and you ain't, you know what I mean?
He had a female, he had a roommate, all that. This is a female prison, and he was an inmate.
So was he having relations too?
Not with me.
A juvenile judge sentencing Tubbs to 2 years in a juvenile lockup facility today. Prosecutors arguing in court for the judge to transfer the 26-year-old Tubbs to an adult jail, saying in their opinion the law gives the judge that authority.
In crystal clear terminology, provides this court with the authority to order a transfer of an individual to sheriff's custody or to a county jail facility after that individual has turned 19 years of age.
Gender said that trans people who have committed violent offences against women should not be able to transfer to women's prisons if they haven't legally changed their gender. This after it emerged that a transgender inmate had sexually assaulted fellow prisoners after being sent to a women's prison.
After hearing arguments, the judge basically stated that under current legislation, a person who commits a crime as a juvenile and is locked up in a juvenile facility, once they turn 19, the court has no authority to transfer that person to an adult facility.
This court will not disregard what the legislature has put onto it as a limitation. This court makes a further order that the Department of Probation is to make any necessary arrangements to allow probation personnel to take custody of Ms. Tubbs today from this building here and to transport Ms. Tubbs to an appropriate secure youth treatment facility within Los Angeles County.
Karen White was on remand for sexual offences she'd committed as a man against women when she told authorities that she now identified as transgender and wanted to go to a women's jail. After a full review, they agreed, despite the nature of the crimes and her not undergoing any physical or legal gender transition. Whilst there, White sexually attacked female inmates, committing 4 assaults and was transferred back to a male prison. Last week, White pleaded guilty to the assaults.
He's every parent's worst nightmare. Your kid goes to the bathroom, and you shouldn't have to worry about them being attacked. And right now, Tubbs is getting a slap on the wrist with 2 years in a juvenile facility when he's a predator who preys on juveniles.
She's tired of the hate,
I was humiliated
the shame,
just for being me.
the discrimination.
I myself am a woman that wants to be treated just like any other woman,
In Dallas County,
regardless of genitalia.
Tiffany Liu, Channel 8 News.
2 female inmates are pregnant after they had sex with another inmate at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women in Clinton. That's the Department of Corrections. Last year, Edna Mahan began housing transgender inmates who identify as female. That's after a lawsuit filed by a trans woman who was forced to live in men's prisons.
Mail says 2 women at New Jersey's only all-women's prison have both fallen pregnant after having sex with transgender inmates. The pregnant women, who were not identified, are housed at the embattled Edna Mahan Correctional Facility.
They say that I'll be able to live a normal, healthy lifestyle. And my first regular general population cell is to be housed with a vicious and dangerous biological male inmate.
Now biological men are sharing prison cells with terrified women, and one woman is reportedly pregnant. NTD's Grace Coulter has the story.
In California, biological male criminals are allowed to be housed in female prisons if they identify as women.
Let's talk now to Melissa Briscoe, who knew Karen White when she was living as a man called Stephen Wood. And she alleges that he committed a rape during that time. Also with us, Dr. Nicola Williams from Fair Play for Women. That's an organisation which is concerned that women's voices are not being listened to while transgender rights laws are being reformed. Also with us too, Tara Hudson. Tara is a trans woman who was put in a men's prison where she was sexually assaulted.
Women's Liberation Front, or WOLF, a feminist organization which is in direct contact with inmates and staff, tells NTD that at least one woman in Central California women's facility is pregnant as a result of the male inmates.
Absolutely. And again, your experience, right, and decision that you made and the agency with which you chose to make that decision is caused precedent. And like you said, it's impacted so many trans women throughout New York State prison. But I would imagine, right, when we think about experiences of abuse, right, and disrespect and all that kind of stuff, may not be physically necessarily, but the kind of emotional trauma that people experience that are trans in prisons. Talk a little bit about that, John. What is that like, right, for folks? Because it's so important for people to understand that.
Absolutely. So the amount of stress that is on the shoulders of trans individuals incarcerated in facilities that don't match their gender is heavy.
Where am I supposed to change? I'm supposed to be on hormones. It started to affect me in so many different ways, and it's so layered.
She says her complaints were ignored, and she suffered physical and psychological damage from being deprived hormones, makeup, and grooming supplies.
This is in the very concerning category for me, because I can see a real danger here where people are in a male prison for sexual offences, including rape, and they basically go, hey, I'm a woman, which gets them out of a male prison where they might be having a rough time anyway, and gets them into a prison full of women who are their primary target.
In Clinton, which New Jersey governor announced plans to close last year, prison bosses said that in both instances the sex was consensual. It is unclear if the women had sex with the same transgender inmate or if it was two different inmates.
And the only reason why is because of the fact that, she tried to rape a woman earlier. It's not a good idea to put her in a female prison in this case. But if
that's another good point. I mean, you're going to put her in there with her penis into a female prison?
And what do you think about the fact that the prison service transferred Karen White to a women's prison?
I think with the offending history, it's absolutely unbelievable that was allowed to happen. There's a very long history with this individual of physical violence, sexual violence against children and against adult women. And I cannot understand why they were allowed to be transferred to a women's prison and freely associate with women on the wing who were themselves vulnerable anyway, and be allowed to continue the offending pattern they've shown for around the last 20 years.
So already we need a Snopes fact check here. Well, not a Snopes fact check because they're not going to fact check something like this, but this is not an all women's prison apparently. I mean, that's kind of that's hard to figure out. It's an all women's prison and women are falling pregnant. How does that happen?
It takes a toll. It takes a toll, and you see it all the time with trans people incarcerated. It's hard for them to break the habits, the cycles that they may have had prior to incarceration, when they're focused really on how do they make it through this place safe. And sometimes that mindset can cause an individual to act out in ways that they normally wouldn't have. For example, and a big one for me, and I think for a lot of trans people who are incarcerated, is self-validation. Where do I find my validation?
Since the case remained in juvenile court, Tubbs would not have to register as a sex offender. Tubbs could have been sentenced to almost a decade in prison if tried and convicted as an adult. LA County Board Supervisor Catherine Barger issuing this statement. The outcome of the Tubbs case is unsatisfactory. Judge Barrera's hands were tied today due to the fact that the DA's office failed to file a motion to transfer Tubbs to an adult criminal court, which is where she rightly belongs. Instead, we're left with a 26-year-old individual sentenced to 2 years in a juvenile facility in isolation, separated by sight and sound from the other juveniles. To carry out justice, all of the oars in the criminal justice system must be rowing in the same direction. Today, that simply didn't happen.
Like, I was so interested in this story.
So he was getting abused in men's prison. He didn't
really tell me he was being abused. He had relationships. I don't know what the circumstances was for them to actually put this man in a women's prison.
Yeah,
he didn't have the operation. This was a man. Like, it wasn't like even if men do have operation, they still put them, because you are a man, they put them in a man's prison.
And for me to find out from one of the sergeants later that was done on purpose, as a bet, as a joke, to see how long a former police officer could last in that type of environment, was like devastating to me. My whole quality of life is damaged. I have physical symptoms. I have emotional distress, panic, anxiety attacks. And I'm triggered by different things, and I have nightmares and insomnia, and like I'm totally affected. I've never felt like this before. Even when I was living with my abusive husband, I've never felt like I feel today.
Where do I find my validation? And in a man's facility, you find it within the men. That to me is not healthy. It's not healthy, and it's also a culture that is enforced and really projected.
Without the hormones there, my skin just started to lose its softness.
Things that some might consider to be frivolous or cosmetic is what makes you feel like yourself.
It was hard to have any privacy.
She used colored pencils on her skin.
Use them as makeup, I would just try to put color in my eyes or lips or cheeks, and it made me feel better.
Yeah.
And wouldn't she want to stay in the male prison? Okay, no, that's not fair. But look.
The reason why she can't stay in the male prison is because the sex change operation cannot be done while she's in the male prison.
Unfortunately, the one thing that this article did not answer is, who's paying for all this?
Some of the men have been rounded up and put in segregation on the yard where the woman who is supposedly pregnant. So they've taken 3 of them and put them in administrative segregation.
Lauren Adams is Wolf's legal counsel. She says several weeks ago, the prison began giving out condoms and providing information about inmates' options if they get pregnant. At the time, Wolf called the new resources a tacit admission by officials that women should expect to be raped when housed in prison with men, where all sex is considered non-consensual by default within the system.
Well, because it's not all women's. Edna Mahan houses 27 transgender prisoners and over 800 women altogether. It is also unclear how far along the 2 inmates are and whether they plan to continue with their respective pregnancies. Whether they plan to continue. There's another euphemism for you. An investigation has been launched.
Abolitionist, I'll reiterate that all people are capable of harm.
First, a woman's torso was found in a multicolored bag in a shopping cart here on Pennsylvania Avenue in East New York.
Of course, there are going to be trans people who perpetrate sexual violence.
Then a few days later, just a few blocks away on Jamaica Avenue, a woman's leg was found. Police are now saying this was the work of a serial killer.
Just as there are people who perpetrate sexual violence in every single community that exists on Earth.
While residents here are trying to grasp what police found inside an apartment, we're learning more about Marcelin, who spent more than 50 years in prison for killing 2 different women, ex-girlfriends.
At the same time, using individual stories of trans people who perpetrated sexual violence to fearmonger about trans women in prisons being dangerous to cis women.
First in 1963, in that case, Marcelin received 20 years to life in prison. After being released on lifetime parole, Marcelin was convicted again in 1986 for manslaughter. This time, the victim's body was found in a bag near Central Park. In 2019, Marcelin was released from prison. For now, she's accused of concealing a corpse. Sources say more charges may come.
Plays into a very harmful stereotype of all trans people being sexually deviant.
Because when I used to go to a new prison, it didn't matter what kind of person I was, right? That didn't matter. What mattered was the color of my skin. What matters is how much of a woman that I looked like. What matters was how long my hair was, right? And these are things that become habits. These are things that you expect. So instead of me for the greater part of my time incarcerated, worrying about things that could really improve my quality of life on the outside, I spent a lot of time worrying about how I can survive in this, right? How can I play this part that everyone thinks that I should play.
After 11 days, transgender advocates paid Bellows bail and she was free. Now, she and her attorney are on a quest for reform.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's the main issue, really, with self-identification, which is the new law that potentially could be coming through Parliament. I mean, at the moment, there is a safeguard where a transgender person will have to prove that they're transgender by at least living for 2 years, say as a woman, and having a doctor's diagnosis. The study that I've just done recently is looking at how many prisoners there are and how many are in male prisons, how many in female prisons. And I've found about 13 in female prisons already, but there are 100 in male prisons living as women, but they will immediately be able to transfer into female prisons when...
So there's a women's prison, 800 women, and they already have almost 30 men in the women's prison.
Adams says she thinks many people picture someone like Laverne Cox from Orange is the New Black when they think of transgender prisoners. But she says this is far from the truth. Many of the ones now housed in female prisons still look like men, and some, she said, are reportedly not taking their hormones, and one has grown a beard. And worse yet, Adams says some of the men that have been transferred into women's prisons are sex offenders.
One of the men who is in the yard where the pregnant woman is and who has been put in segregation is a sex offender. He has been convicted of multiple forcible rapes.
She was in jail for 5 years, got out, and then committed the attempted rape, and then got put back into jail and now is serving a life sentence.
There's a couple of examples here. A transgender rapist who was moved to a women-only jail, despite still having male genitalia, was segregated after making unwanted sexual advances on female inmates. We have a male transgender prisoner guilty of a brutal murder moved from a women's jail because he kept having intercourse with female inmates. There are, it seems, examples of where people are being moved and then pose a threat. This is the point, isn't it? Pose a threat to the women in prison.
Yep.
And I can also, without knowing anything about the particulars here, and I don't know that I fully even believe the particulars that we're being told. Like, we're just told that the sex was consensual. I mean, maybe it was. But listen, there's no reason to believe that whatsoever.
She says another male inmate housed in the California Institution for Women is serving time for molesting 2 children.
You're taking violent criminal men, oftentimes they're like rapists and sex offenders, who are in prison as men and then one day say, you know what, I'm actually a woman. And they're sexually attracted to women. And so this is all just kind of a happy coincidence that now they get to be housed with women.
As of April, around 250 biological male prisoners filed requests to transfer to women's prisons. So far, only about 20 transfers have been processed. None have been denied.
Already it's possible to do that, but it will only ever get worse when it becomes easier for people to transfer.
And just explain then this law that is going through Parliament, because your organisation is all about having a look at how this impacts women, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're taking them, you're locking them into cages with actual women, and then if a woman becomes pregnant, in fact, some of the headlines, there was one headline, it might have been in the Daily Mail or one of these other outlets, it said that 2 women have fallen pregnant at a women's prison. They've fallen pregnant.
So we're against the self-identification of gender, which is the new law that is being proposed to go through. So there's a consultation at the moment.
So you don't want people just to be able to tick a box
exactly. So
saying, I am now a woman.
At the moment, to get a gender recognition certificate, you need to have lived as a woman for 2 years and have a doctor's diagnosis.
Let's look at this article. And you see, female prisoner claims she was raped by a transgender inmate, and the prison tried to cover it up. Well, the article goes on to read, a woman in an Illinois prison says she was raped by a transgender fellow inmate, was the subject of an attempted cover-up by the Illinois Department of Corrections.
Yeah, what are they falling on exactly? That's not something that happens after a particular act Now, whether that act was consensual, that's my point, there's no reason to believe that.
More about how the history of psychology has contributed to this stereotype in my video, True Transsexuals. But my point is that you can't judge all trans people based on the actions of a few trans people who have caused harm. Maybe this is too controversial for y'all, but I think that just because a trans person has perpetrated sexual violence doesn't mean that we shouldn't also fight the systemic transphobia that they face, while, of course, seeking accountability for the harm that they caused.
Numerous women have written to Wolf saying they're terrified.
Having to use the toilet in front of men, having to shower in front of men. It's demoralizing and humiliating. We have religious women in there who, as part of their practice of their religion, rely on sex separation. And so on a daily 24-hour basis, they're being, that right's being infringed upon. It's really unreal.
Some law was passed, right? And so you got the opportunity to transition out of a men's prison into a woman's prison. So what was that experience like for you, knowing in terms of the victory, right, of being able to be where your gender is assigned to, right? And so talk a little bit about that feeling of obviously getting the news about you being transferred to a woman's facility.
It was extremely overwhelming. I didn't really know how to feel about it at first because there was so much unexpectedness. I knew, though, at my core that I was grateful to do this. I was happy to be a part of this movement because I wanted to play a part in making this accessible.
Nicola, this came to light last week when White appeared at a Crown Court and pleaded guilty to rape. What do you think about the fact that someone charged with rape who says they identify as a woman was able to be put into a women's prison?
It shows the risk assessment process is not working. And I think we have to be clear here that this isn't a one-off. There are other male-bodied, fully intact rapists in prison. There's somebody today called Jessica Winfield, moved from a male category A prison into a women's prison. And Jessica is in a female prison now as we speak.
She claims the incident took place in June 2019 and that she was strong-armed by a supervisory officer into denying the assault had occurred. Public Broadcasting Service station WTTW reported. The correctional officer subsequently punished Jane Doe for filing a false complaint, according to the lawsuit.
For every trans woman and trans man incarcerated, right? Because if I chose not to do it, maybe that would have slowed the process down, right? So 6 months can mean a stabbing, a cutting, can mean a sexual assault for a trans individual in prison. So the faster that I took this opportunity and made it through, the more comfortable I felt with the system actually setting up a course, a procedure for this to be more frequent.
Mm-hmm. Because we are not going to be told if a trans male rapes a female inmate, that information is not going to make it to us through any official channels. They would never tell us that.
Now, the transfer of a transgender inmates from male to female prisons, not female to male prisons, but from male to female prisons, has been a contentious policy within IDOC. The plaintiff's attorney wrote in the complaint an attempt.
That person committed 2 child rapes. So this isn't a one-off mistake with the prison service. This is actually prison policy. And it's that policy that needs to change.
I'm not sure it is prison policy. They have a transgender case board that exists to decide upon the location of a transgender prisoner whose legal gender does not accord with their self-identified gender. This should consider all previous offending history, but that did not take place in the Karen White case, for which they have apologised.
So that's the policies, that the prison have discretion through this transgender case board to move a male-bodied person into a female prison.
In an attempt to justify the transfers, defendants Sexton, Calhoun, Keeler, and currently other unknown IDOC employees covered up the sexual assault of plaintiff and tried to falsely classify it as consensual.
And that was policy that changed in 2016. And
Before that, I understand. Before that, transgender criminals needed a gender recognition certificate.
Exactly. So now that has changed since 2016. So actually, the prison, through a risk assessment process, can have the discretion to move a transgender person into a female prison, even if they have legal status as a male and male bodies.
But one look at the criminal history would say that kind of. Which is what they didn't do in the Karen White case. They didn't take into account the previous criminal history.
This person was on remand for raping a woman. It's hard to know how they couldn't understand that that was the criminal history.
She says the female inmates never got a say in the law, and even now, their calls for help go unheard. Adams says they feel forgotten.
I mean, they just feel like nobody cares about us, nobody cares about our safety, nobody cares about our feelings.
Quote, there is emerging evidence that certain men are jumping on the trans bandwagon to access and harm very vulnerable women in prison. Do you agree?
Yeah, I completely 100% agree.
86% of incarcerated women have histories of sexual or physical abuse. Many have PTSD. The mental health options in there are very limited. And I don't know how you treat anxiety that's associated with literally being locked up with a sex offender. It's not like you can medicate that away or counsel it away.
Yeah, no, can't have it. We rule against you. If I was the warden, I don't know. Look, if she's found a way to pay for the whole thing and then after the surgery she wants to get transferred, I would, okay? I don't really care. Okay, sure, go, fine, whatever, right?
There's what I'm seeing at the moment, there's real transgender people like myself that have transitioned as children, lived my whole entire life as a female, my adult life. And now there's all of these people coming out of the woodwork, making it really difficult for me and people like me. They're just letting them change willy-nilly, and it's going the wrong way. I'm sorry, it's making me quite emotional.
But if she wants to inconvenience anyone, the state costs any money to do her sex change operation after she's, laid everyone to waste here, everyone she's been in contact with. Hell no.
Have you seen all the TYT videos from today? Check out the Young Turks YouTube.
And she spends most of the video talking about why trans women should not be placed in women's prisons, especially for people without bottom surgery. She very heavily implies that they should not be in women's prisons, in which case usually the only available option is a men's prison in that scenario.
In a July phone call to Wolf, one female inmate said prison guards told inmates they won't segregate the men from the women's cells because they're worried about getting sued.
I mean, and even if it was supposedly on the surface consensual, when you put a woman in a prison cell with a violent, dangerous man, and the woman, quote, chooses to have sex with the man, is that actually consent? Is there a real choice there?
And how do you think that we feel? We do not feel safe knowing you're scared of a lawsuit.
I mean, we've been told by the Me Too movement that if a woman chooses to have sex with her boss, that it's not really a choice. There's not really any consent there, or not as much consent as there should be because of the power dynamics at play.
We do not feel safe that you're going to put them in our room because you're afraid they'll claim discrimination, when all along the discrimination has been against us.
So you're a woman locked in a cell with a man who could overpower you at any moment and who is sexually attracted to females, and you have sex with him. Is it even a choice? Or is it something these women are doing just out of self-preservation?
Adams said the situation cannot be blamed on the prisons, since the policy was made law by California politicians. She said some of the legislators were trying to protect transgender individuals.
But, the solution to men being victimized in men's prisons is not to change who the victims are. It's not to, instead of having male victims, now we have female victims.
So no matter how you slice it, I'm not sure how you can even call it consensual.
Fundamentally, she says, women deserve to be housed in single-sex prisons.
we're not clownfish, we're not frogs. We are born how we're born, and that doesn't change, and no matter how much we see ourselves in a certain way. So I think that we need to remember that we're not housing identities, we're housing people.
And if they've got 30 male prisoners in this one women's prison in New Jersey, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of men who are in women's prisons right now.
She says for the most part, there's been silence over what's now taking place in the prisons. Likely, she says, because many people are afraid of taking a position and being called transphobic. Adam says the time has come for people to be brave and speak up.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to tell you about the first 30 seconds I was there, the first 2 minutes I was there. I remember we pulled into Takana Correctional Facility and the van stopped. So the door opens and a sergeant and a captain, I believe, or a deputy.
I'm approaching this topic as an abolitionist, so while Blair makes an inconsistent and transphobic argument about how some trans women are less valid in their identities or are more dangerous to cis women based on how cis-passing they are.
They open and they say, what is your DIN number? And I say 12A5516. And they say, not anymore. And I said, excuse me? And they were like, you are, I forget, 10G something. And I was like, okay.
So you can check that out too. She misrepresents the trans teenager's experiences and cites an article that intentionally misgenders her.
And again, they're violent and dangerous. That's why they're in prison.
So when I found that Wolf was creating this space for us to talk and air our grievances and be vulnerable and join the part of a lawsuit that will help protect me and other women, this is the only group. It was like Kevin said.
So as I've been saying for a long time, this is I guarantee you there is right now an epidemic of sexual assaults by men against women in women's prisons. And it's happening right now, and we will never be told about it, though.
And the next words out of the mouth was, you have 90 days left. We want you to make it through here with no problems. We don't want anything to happen while you're here. So we don't want you disclosing your gender identity. We don't want you telling people.
Because these women have no way of telling us. And of course, the Me Too movement is conspicuously silent about the whole thing.
To read the letters from incarcerated women or sign the petition to halt the transfer of men into women's prisons, you can go to Women's Liberation Front's website. Grace Coulter, NTD News.